He stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the autumn wind tugging at his suit jacket, a free man in the eyes of the law. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted his name, and the world recorded the moment a jury's decision had cut his chains. He offered no comment, no triumphant smile. He only adjusted his tie and walked into the waiting car, swallowed by tinted glass and the roar of traffic. For most, the trial had ended here. For him, it was a victory. But for the family seated in the back rows of that courtroom, who had listened to every testimony and seen the verdict fall like a hammer on their grief, it was only the beginning. They had lost a son, a brother, a husband. The man who now walked freely had taken something from them that no judge could restore, no jury could measure. When the word acquitted rang through the air, they did not cry out, did not shout. Their silence was deliberate, heavy, and cold. They knew vengeance had to be careful, calculated, and untraceable. Justice, they realized, had failed them, but there were other forms of balance in the world, older, darker, and merciless. In the weeks that followed, the acquitted man tried to return to his life. He dined at the same restaurants, jogged in the same parks, and spent his evenings in bars where the music was too loud and the faces too indifferent to remember his name. But he began to notice small things, at first so subtle they seemed like tricks of the mind. A face in a crowd that lingered too long. The same car parked across from his apartment on consecutive nights. A phone call that rang once, twice, then ended before he answered. He told himself it was paranoia, the residue of a trial that had made him infamous. He told himself that soon, people would forget. But the family did not forget. The brother followed him first, learning his patterns, his habits, when he was most vulnerable. The father gathered tools, not the kind found in hardware stores, but the ones that left no fingerprints, no paper trails. The mother, quietest of them all, was the one who made the plan. Revenge, she knew, was not about rage. Rage burned fast and left only ashes. Revenge had to be steady, patient, like a slow knife pressing deeper with each breath. One night, after too many drinks, he stumbled home alone. The street was quiet, the lamps casting long, lonely shadows. He never saw the figure behind him until the cloth pressed against his face, the sharp scent stealing his breath. Darkness came swiftly, swallowing him whole. When he awoke, the world had changed. He was no longer in his apartment, but in a basement, the kind with stone walls and dripping pipes. His hands were bound, his mouth dry. Across the room sat the family, faces he remembered from court, faces that had stared at him with hollow eyes as he walked free. There was no judge here, no jury, no gavel to strike. Only them and him. They did not scream. They did not curse. They told him stories instead, stories of the boy he had killed, of the birthdays missed, the empty chair at the dinner table, the laughter that no longer filled their house. Each word was a blade, carving deeper than any weapon. He pleaded, he protested, he insisted the court had cleared him. But the mother leaned forward, her voice calm and cold, and said, "The court decided what it could. Now it's our turn." What followed was not quick. It was not merciful. Days blurred into nights in that place where no one could hear his cries. They did not kill him, at least not at first. They broke him in smaller ways, piece by piece, until the confident man who walked out of the courthouse steps was gone, leaving behind only a shell of fear and regret. When his body was finally found months later, discarded in a place no one cared to look, the police shook their heads. Another mystery. Another crime. No one could prove a thing. The family never spoke of it, not to friends, not to each other. Their grief remained, but the weight was different now. He had been acquitted, yes. But freedom, they had shown him, was never truly his to keep. The night his acquittal was announced, the air in the courtroom felt stale, suffocating, like all the oxygen had been pulled out of it. The jury filed out with lowered eyes, and the judge's gavel struck, declaring the trial complete. The man at the center of it all rose with a slow confidence, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. To the cameras, to the headlines, he was a symbol of the system working as intended, innocent until proven guilty and found not guilty in the end. But to the family in the back row, The mother clutching her late son's watch so tightly the band snapped, the father staring forward with a face carved from stone, the brother whose fists trembled on his knees. He was proof of something else. Proof that sometimes evil learned to wear a better mask than justice could see through. They walked out together, silent. Outside the courthouse, supporters and protesters clashed, shouting over one another, but the family moved through the noise like ghosts. None of them spoke as they drove home. None of them needed to. The same thought had already taken root in each of their minds. If the world refused to punish him, they would. The first step was patience. Vengeance rushed was vengeance wasted. They studied him in ways no detective ever had. The brother trailed him through crowded streets, memorizing the time he stopped at the same corner cafe every Thursday, the exact bench he collapsed on after his nightly jog, the name of the woman who sometimes joined him for drinks but never stayed the night. The father, who had once been a craftsman, began to fashion tools, quiet tools, hidden in plain sight. Not guns, not knives, nothing that left simple answers for police to follow. He wanted things slower, things that sank into the mind like a poison drip. The mother, always the calmest, sat in her kitchen at night, notebooks spread before her. She wrote lists, schedules, contingencies. Revenge was not rage, it was math, calculation, inevitability. She whispered to the picture of her son on the fridge as she wrote, promising him that balance would be restored. The man himself noticed nothing at first. He was arrogant enough to believe the trial had ended the matter, that people would forget, that time would dissolve their anger. He returned to his routines, eager to wash away the taste of courtrooms and headlines. Yet slowly, the edges of his certainty began to fray. One morning he woke to find his car tires slashed. The police wrote it off as vandalism. Days later, his front door was left ajar, though nothing seemed stolen. He convinced himself he had forgotten to lock it. His phone rang at odd hours, silent on the other end. He told himself it was a prank. But then came the nights where he knew someone was watching. He felt eyes in the dark corners of the street, behind him in the reflection of shop windows, across from him on the train. Faces he didn't recognize seemed to appear more than once. A creeping dread began to settle in his stomach. It was the brother who first confronted him. Not openly, not violently, but by slipping into the same bar, sitting at the counter and staring until the man noticed. No words passed between them, but the look was enough to unnerve him. A reminder. A warning. He left the bar quickly that night, but the brother didn't follow. He didn't need to. The seed of fear had been planted. Weeks later came the taking. It was done without spectacle, without witnesses. A rag soaked in chemicals, a van door sliding shut, the city's noise carrying on indifferent. When he awoke, his world had shrunk to 4 damp walls, a single light bulb swinging overhead. The family came in shifts. The father spoke of the son he had buried too young, telling stories of the boy's first bicycle, his first job, the way his laughter filled their house. The mother spoke less, but when she did, her voice was sharp as glass. She asked him questions he could not answer. Did he remember the color of her boy's eyes? Did he hear the way her son gasped when he took his last breath? Each question hollowed him out a little more. The brother was the least merciful. He reminded him of the trial, the lies told under oath, the smirk he had worn when the verdict was read. They did not starve him, but they did not feed him well. They kept him alive, just enough to let the weight of time press down. They cut him off from the outside world until days blurred, until he lost track of how long he had been down there. Sleep became torment. When he closed his eyes, he dreamed of the family standing around his bed, waiting. When he woke, they were there. His pleas grew weaker with each passing week. He promised money, he promised silence, he promised to leave the city, the country, anything they wanted. But the mother's reply never changed. We don't want you gone. We want you to feel what we feel, to live with it until there's nothing left of you. And so he did. Piece by piece, they stripped away his arrogance, his dignity, his belief in freedom. By the time his body was found months later, thrown into a desolate stretch of woods where no one ventured, the man who had once stood on courthouse steps with his tie straightened and head high was unrecognizable. The official report called it an unsolved crime. The newspapers printed speculation for a week and then forgot. But the family did not forget. They carried their grief still, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a wild, gnawing wound. It was something colder, quieter. A balance restored in their eyes. The world had acquitted him. They had not. The basement became his universe. At first, he raged, screamed until his throat was raw, hurled himself against the restraints until his wrists bled. He demanded lawyers, police, cameras, demanded that the family think of the consequences. But his words only echoed back at him, swallowed by stone walls. The family did not shout back. They listened, patient, and when he had exhausted himself, they spoke in calm, measured tones that chilled him more than violence ever could. The father visited most often in the mornings. He carried with him a chair, nothing more, and sat in front of the man like a teacher in a classroom. He spoke of his son, how he loved chess, how he dreamed of studying architecture, how he used to whistle while mowing the lawn. These were not accusations, they were memories. But each one landed like a blade. The man in the chair tried to cover his ears, but the father's voice carried, steady, relentless. After hours, the father would leave, taking the chair with him, leaving silence as suffocating as his words. The brother's visits were different. He brought no stories, only silence. He stood in the shadows, arms crossed, staring with eyes that never blinked. Sometimes he would move closer, leaning down until his breath brushed the man's ear, and whisper a single word, "Murderer." Then he would step back into the dark, saying nothing more. The anticipation of his visits became worse than the visits themselves. The man never knew when the whisper would come, when the eyes would appear just beyond the light. It was the mother, though, who hollowed him out most deeply. She came rarely, but when she did, the room shifted. She never raised her voice. She never struck him. Instead, she asked him questions he could not bear. "Do you know how long it took for my son to die?" she asked once, her voice flat. "Do you know how many times I still hear him calling for me when I try to sleep?" She leaned forward, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "When you walked free, did you feel relief? Did you feel proud? Did you imagine us broken, powerless?" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "Do you feel powerful now?" He wept then, but tears did not move her. She left him alone in the dark, his sobs echoing off the walls. Weeks became months. They did not torture him in ways the police might later describe in reports. They did not need to. The mind, they knew, could unravel far more completely than flesh. They adjusted the lights, sometimes leaving him in blinding brightness for days, sometimes in total darkness where he lost all sense of time. They fed him irregularly, never starving, but never enough to satisfy. He began to lose weight, his cheeks hollowing, his body trembling with weakness. Sleep abandoned him. Fear was his only constant companion. One night, he awoke to find a small object placed on the floor before him. It was a watch, the band broken, the glass cracked. He recognized it. It had been clutched by the mother in the courtroom. It belonged to the boy he had killed. He stared at it for hours, unable to look away, until he was sobbing again, muttering apologies to no one. His mind began to betray him. He started speaking to people who weren't there. He begged shadows for forgiveness. He saw the boy's face in the patterns of the damp wall. The family's work was almost complete, not just to punish but to erase. To strip him of everything he was, until nothing remained but a hollow shell echoing their grief back to him. When the end came, it was quiet. The father entered one morning, set the chair down, and sat across from him as always. But this time he carried no stories. He only watched as the man trembled, muttering nonsense, his eyes wide and empty. After a long silence, the father rose, collected the chair, and left. That night, the brother dragged the body into the woods, leaving it where the earth was wild and uncaring. The discovery made news for a week. The police shook their heads, muttered about gang violence, retribution, unsolved mysteries. Reporters speculated but moved on. The world forgot, just as it forgets so many. But the family did not forget. They never spoke of what they had done, not even to each other. The house remained quiet, the empty chair at the table still a wound. Yet in their silence, there was a grim kind of peace. The system had failed them, but they had written their own verdict.
He had been acquitted, yes.
But acquittal was not absolution. And freedom was never his to keep.